So today I wanted to talk about observables, basically taking nothing from vanilla JavaScript and making an observable based off of the RxJS documentation, which hopefully will go well. Who am I? I am me. I'm Neal Lubin. I'm a software engineer at WeWork on the WeWork.com team. Main editor on GitHub, and I have a Stack Overflow profile. That URL I think is a little bit not working right now, but I'm Neal on Stack Overflow. I'm a little bit active on the JavaScript chat on Stack Overflow as well. Ooh, I skipped too far, didn't I? So what I want to talk about is general JavaScript paradigms, including observables. So three JavaScript paradigms that do exist are promises. It's my first time talking, so keep me. Promises, generators, and observables. I wanted to talk about promises and generators and then move on to how observables fits into that mix. So now to the content. What is an observable, and how can I easily build one using simple JavaScript? So that's the basis of my talk, is how I could take nothing and build an observable. So an observables, if a lot of people know from using AngularJS, is they use RxJS to do event streaming throughout your application. But most people don't actually know how any of that works, and just assume someone else built it. It'll work perfectly fine for me, and that's it. But we're going to go into how we can actually build that on our own. So first thing, I just want to talk about promises. So how promises work, execute once, and then return the same thing every time. So for example, we're fetching from google.com. Yay, Google. Every single time, A and B, it's going to be the exact same response every time. We'll get the home page of google.com, which is fun, but nothing can change from that. You're not really having an event stream from that. If you want data from an input, somebody inputting data into a form, it's not that simple to use a promise for that type of case. Because you always get the same data, it's not updatable, et cetera. Generators, ignore the Fibonacci function. This probably will fail your interview at Google if you give this for Fibonacci. You creating a generator that gives you 10 Fibonacci numbers, and every single time it's yielded. Basically, you have to ask for data. It's create it, but then you have to keep asking for what the next value is, which is not ideal for, as I said before, a form. So what we want to do is be able to get data through an event stream. So we have a Fibonacci generator, and this is a Fibonacci observable. So what we have here is, on the left you have the generator, where you have to yield, you have to keep asking for the next value over and over again. And on the right, we have the generator, but in an observable pattern where we get all the values in an event stream. So as soon as we subscribe to the observable, we'll get all the values in a row as long as our function is functional. Just some background. Sorry, going back 2 steps. But just some background as to why I am doing this talk. So the reason why I'm doing this talk is because I worked with Angular 2 when it first came out a year and a half ago. And I was curious about what the internals of how all that worked was, and how RxJS worked, and what this observable pattern was. And I got very, very curious about that. So I went into their documentation and was trying to figure out how exactly everything works. So I decided, hey, neat, I'm cool. I can try to do this on my own. So I decided to read the documentation on ReactiveX documentation and try to re-implement the observable pattern and all their functionality myself. So this is basically this talk was my journey of how I did that. So this is the basic observable. What you saw before was basically you pass in a function, an observer function, to the observable itself, and then you subscribe to its observer event. So you're able to basically do something like this, where we had the generator before. We generate, we pass that function, and then we're able to say .next, which is the same as this subscribe next on the bottom, in the simplest form. So you're able to basically call next, next, next as many times as you want to pass data through to the subscription method, which is very cool. But as we saw, this is literally, I think, like 10 lines of code, which gives you a very simple observable. And my talk is over now. The talk's not over, but that is basically it. So from the subscribe method, you return what you get from that observer, which you can then use to, I guess, this is the unsubscribe method, which you can then use to remove event listeners, remove any sort of data you want after you want the, it's basically a destroy methodology of destroying the observable. Cool. So before I get into what the title says, there's this really cool thing on the RxJS, in the ReactiveX documentation called Rx marbles. You're able to have these marble diagrams where you're able to actually move around these little dots, the marbles, and see how these individual functions get affected once you move the data around. So for this one, map, you can see this one says x times 10. So I'm moving around the 1, 2, and the 3. You can see how the numbers on the bottom change. So what RxJS did, and I think Kafir and a few other things did, they re-implemented array-type methods for observables, like map, filter, for each. So you could manipulate the data in any way and pipe different data through the different forms and create new observables. So every method on the RxJS observable creates a brand new one, which means they have immutability, and you could manipulate the data in any which way you would like to do. So this is, for example, map in action. I have an input observable, which I'm just listening on the event of someone typing into that input. And you can see how, as I type in hello, it updates. And as it types in race car, obviously race car backwards is hello. No, race car. But it's very, very simple. Basically taking that, running a map as if it's an array, and able to then subscribe to that new observable and output the value. And it was actually pretty simple to try to figure out how that was created. We can make map basically how one might think you'd make map. You take a mapping function, and you would then run through, if you look at the line app, basically subscribe to yourself, which is kind of odd, but you have to create a brand new observable because you want to make them immutable. So you subscribe to yourself, and then that will be your unsubscribe, and then you would map that value and then return that to the new observable's next method, and then return the unsubscribe for yourself in that observable, so that way if that map observable is unsubscribed to, the unsubscribe can go up the chain, which is pretty cool. But the thing is, mapping things, mapping people's inputs is useful, but in real life, I don't know if you would necessarily use that every day. Sorry, I remember this GIF from years ago, so decided to use it. So in real life, you would use things like trying to make sure form inputs are valid with each other. Try to make sure that, for example, 2 passwords or general things on a form are the same. So what you can use is this thing called, for example, for password matching. You could use something called combine latest, which you could take 2 different observables. Over here, it's x and y. And you could combine them in any which way you want. So over here, you see 1 in A becomes 1A. And you could just get that stream as a stream of data from 2 different data points and combine them into one, which is very cool. You could use that for combining an AJAX request with an input value, whatever you might want to do. But for our example, we want to basically say input 1, we're going to type in hello. Input 2, we're going to also type in hello. And you can see that that value comes through as hello, hello, because now we have both values in an array. I'm just saying my function for combining these 2 is just putting it into an array of 2 things. And we're getting those values. So in the same way that we did map, we could do this thing, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I'll give you a few seconds to absorb that, because I might have gone a little bit fast before, so I'm sorry for that. So basically, what we want to do is take 2 observables, and we're creating 1 brand new one. So what we want to do is take observable 1, observable 2, and then subscribe to both of them. And then this is not the spec for combine latest, because theoretically it should be certain other things, but this is good enough for our example. How we want to combine first value, second value, and we're just passing it through to the combine function and to next for both of them. Anytime either of them gets a value, it's just being passed through. So we're able to combine both values into one, which which is pretty cool. So then you're able to do what we did before and say, typing in 1, typing in 2, and then get both, which is pretty awesome, actually. But really, for passwords, as you saw over here, we're basically getting every single possible value that can be passed into every single possible input all the time into our subscription, which is not ideal. We really want only when the values are equal to each other to come into our subscription stream. So what we can do is filter. Same with array. We want to filter out values that we don't want. So for this example, we want, for example, for both, only want values where both of them are equal to each other, which everybody's used to if they're using Angular. It's useful in many different ways. So this is our combined example from a minute ago, where we're just getting every possible value in, which is not ideal. But then we could put it all together and get our filter. It's a line straight through that. We can get our filter, making sure that value A is equal to value B. And that's the only time that inputs come through on our subscription method, which allows for a lot of cool types of things. You can go through and basically do this for many different types of inputs or event streams, not necessarily inputs. Same as what we did for map. We have the filter function, where we're able to say, we take in a filter function, we make sure that that value is kosher, and then we pass it through to next. Otherwise, we're just going to completely toss it out the window. We could, in theory, pass that through to an error handler or anything we might want to do, but this is our example. But that's what we're doing in our example, is that we're basically passing through every example through. So as we can see, we can now combine our map function, which theoretically we're not using in our thing, but theoretically we can. We combine our map function with our combine latest, which is this long stream of data, with our filter, and then get something that will hopefully give us useful data for our forms, for anything like that. My talk is very, very short because that's just how it works. I just want to tell everybody about RxMarbles, which is very, very useful for those marble diagrams that you saw before. You're able to play around with all the different methods that exist within RxJS or within ReactiveX in general. The ReactiveX documentation as well is very, very useful. And from giving this talk, this is the third version of this talk, but from giving this talk for the first time, I decided to create my own observable library. I called it the Observable. You have to say that 10 times fast in order to install it. Otherwise, it doesn't let you do it. The Observable, which I do have here. I created a simple observable library by reading the RxJS documentation. I beg you, don't use this on production. If you do, I will come to your, no. The reason why, there are no tests for this right now. Problem is, when I released this about 9 months ago, for some reason I was getting about 10,000 installs a week. I think because it had the word observable in it, and Angular 2 had just come out, or Angular 4, so everyone was looking for the newest observable library that they can do, and apparently SEO-wise, servable is good because it's observable without the OB. But I'm looking for PRs for people to help me out, write actual tests, and maybe we can make it an actual thing based off of just documentation and working together. So that would be cool. Yeah, that's it for me.